Hello, everybody. Welcome to TBI Talk. And I'm your host, Lindy Boone Michaelis. And I am very excited about today's program. I get to have a conversation with somebody that intrigues me, inspires me, informs me. And his name is Daniel Ignacio. And I'm going to introduce him here in a minute. But first, I just want to remind my audience that I'm doing this podcast as a representative of Ryan's Reach. And Ryan's Reach is an organization that I'm a co-founder of. And we started Ryan's Reach back in 2003 when we felt like we had reached our footing after my son had a brain injury, my son Ryan. He fell 3 stories. He incurred a severe, devastating brain injury. And it did take us a couple of years to just find our new normal. And at that point, we decided that we wanted to reach out to the brain injury community because we felt we had a platform and a position to be able to bring awareness and also provide funding. We did fundraisers, and we've been able to assist TBI survivors to get scholarships and attend High Hopes Head Injury Program in Tustin. So that is the basis of why we decided to jump into the podcast pool and try to extend our reach out to people that maybe are not in our area, which is Orange County, California. We know that it is just worldwide, nationwide and worldwide, not just county-wide issue. And we have been privileged to meet a lot of wonderful people along the way as my son Ryan has been reaching out for his own recovery. And one of the very compelling individuals that I have come across is named Daniel Ignacio. And I asked if he would be a guest because I think he's got a story that is almost jaw-dropping. Okay, well, listen, I wanted to first introduce you. I met you several times through this support group that you run for people with TBI. And he disappeared. And then I just couldn't believe everything I was learning about you. And our paths have crossed at symposiums, at conferences. And the more I learned about you, the more I just felt like you're a person, one of the first people I wanted to talk to on my podcast. Now, you are a UCLA clinical neuropsychology postdoctoral fellow. That's a mouthful.
Yeah, I know, right?
Yeah. I had to read it. But I wanted to start talking to you about the thing that makes you most interesting to me, and that is that you are a TBI survivor.
Yes.
Right?
Proud survivor. 15 years is some change, going on 16 years now.
Yes. And not only did you survive, but you were thriving and reaching out to others to help others. So I am delighted to share your story. And I wanted to just invite our listeners to hear what your TBI story was before we talk about all the things you're doing. Can you just take me back to what happened to you and describe your traumatic brain injury experience?
Yeah, and so thank you for the kind introduction. It's been great running into you all of these years. Very few and far between, but it's always a pleasure every time. And it's such I must say it's such an honor and a privilege, and really my life's work be in this space and to advocate for my community. And so I fully and I'm uncomfortably familiar with all of these psychosocial things, and my family's involved as well. It goes back to January of 2008. And so, sparing all the details, I was assaulted and pushed off a balcony, a 3-story balcony, and there was a ditch underneath, so it was about 40-foot drop, and so these were friends. At some point, like, I considered them very close, so in addition to the head trauma, I had all of the psychological trust issues along with all of that as well. But we can get into that at another time. But the TBI, so after I had fallen, I fell, and it had been raining about the whole week before, so the ground was soft. And so upon impact, it broke my fall just a little bit, right? So upon impact, I did pop my left lung, so I had pneumothorax. I whiplashed, and so I had traumatic brain injury when I impacted the ground, when my head bounced off the ground, and had a bit of hemorrhaging, or a bit of bleeding, traumatic hemorrhaging, and so I had gone about 2 hours. It's estimated per these police reports. It's been estimated that I was left there for about 2 hours. With one lung, and so which contributed to hypoxic brain injury, which was, a lot of my doctors are saying that was a lot of the big reason why I went unconscious for a month. And so when paramedics had picked me up, I had passed out, and I had stayed out for a month, so I was comatose. And the month I was in a coma, the overwhelming amount of my family and friends that were there, they were all supporting. Like, every day, from what I hear, I saw pictures every day. The emergency room was full, and so I had woken up towards the end of January, so about February, and in that moment I had awoken from my coma, not really knowing who I was, or where I was at, why my body wasn't working. I had all these questions, but really I couldn't move, I couldn't talk. I remember seeing my mother's face. She was crying.
So you could think, and you knew you were conscious, but you couldn't do anything.
Yeah, and so I'll preface that is what I remember from a coma is nothing.
Okay.
It's blackness. And so, neurologic trauma, I was not forming memories, and so everything was just black. But I do remember slightly coming out and being transferred. So I had a period of post-traumatic amnesia for a couple of days, and I can recall being transferred to my inpatient rehab, and I was being transferred via ambulance, and my grandmother and mother were in the ambulance with me, and so I do remember their faces, but also I remember the hope that they had in their face. And so as I moved on to inpatient rehab for another several weeks.
Yeah. And then it was a whole learning process to relearn how to walk and talk and eat and all of that.
Yeah. And I had to relearn how to walk. It's funny, like your legs atrophy, your muscles atrophy.
Right.
Rapidly.
Yeah.
You don't use them just a couple of days. You
Yeah.
forget how to do them, how to use them. And so that went from my walking, from my talking, how to eat, going to the bathroom. And so,
Hey, Daniel, I'm going to interrupt you right there because we do have to take a break, but put a pin right there because I want to pick right up where we leave off right now, okay? So hold your thought. Okay, thanks. We'll be right back. Well, I want to welcome Daniel back. Thank you for being here to hear this amazing story from Daniel Ignacio and his traumatic brain injury experience. I want to continue where we left off. Daniel, you were in an ambulance with your mother and your grandmother, and you saw the hope in their faces. And then you ended up at a rehab facility and basically had to learn all the things that we learn when we're infants, and we have to learn to talk and walk and eat and all of that all over again. And that is pretty common with the TBI survivor, isn't it?
Yes, medical trauma, neurologic trauma come a lot with those very common things. And I had remembered once I was in inpatient rehabilitation, I slowly began learning how to walk, how to talk, and I could and my friends would come, they drive an hour and a half to come see me, and we would spend the weekend together. And so those were things that I was starting to get up and start doing. And but and I remember I was in a wheelchair, so I wasn't walking for some time. And so I remember I was in my wheelchair, and just every day I remember being in the inpatient rehabilitation, not believing that that this was reality. I literally thought I was in the longest, worst nightmare ever.
Right.
And so every day I would spend my free time when they would roll me out into the back, outside every afternoon. I would sit in my wheelchair and tried so desperately to fall asleep, so desperately hoping to wake up and like, whew,
Yeah,
all right.
it's a nightmare.
Incredible nightmare. And so and I had to learn crawling, starting to crawl, and so so much support from my family. And I remember being in my wheelchair, just please, like thinking like, what anything I can do to just walk again. And so and so I was having all these exploding emotions, but really no way to express it. I mean, I wasn't talking very well at the time. I wasn't writing very well at the time. I had, there's a piano. I remember vividly. There's a piano in the rehab, and I'm a classically trained pianist.
Well, that I didn't know. Wow.
And I had gone in and sat in front and saw the notes and everything, but I had forgotten how to play. Later, really knowing that the word for that is music alexia. So there is a term for it. So I had forgotten how to read music and play the piano, and so I remember just sitting there with all of these feelings and no real way to express it. I couldn't talk.
Very frustrating. Yeah, so frustrating. But you got very depressed, didn't you, at some point? And I want to hear about that and then how you turned the corner.
Right. And so with the recovery after TBI, and it's so important, is there's the medical recovery. Yes. And you can get better and you can, be medically stable and and you can even walk out of a rehab center. There's a second level of recovery, of healing after a TBI that is starting to get a whole lot more recognition. Is after the hospital, and then of course you go through the acute, the subacute, the post-acute, right, where maybe you're doing some outpatient work. But after all that's said and done, there's the community reintegration, and that is where a lot of survivors have incredible difficulty,
Yeah.
especially without support. And that's where family caregivers can be so important. Practitioners, providers, therapists, it's so incredibly important. And
So
so
you got to where you really felt so despondent, but what was the key thing that helped you decide, I'm going to start exercising, I'm going to start studying again? How did you make that turn?
so it was at one point I had gained a whole bunch of weight. So once I got back home after all my post-acute rehab and I went into community reintegration, all my friends, I was 18 at the time. And so like, they're college and like, I'm just sitting in a wheelchair. And so and then as each passing day, the discrepancy became further and further.
Yeah.
And so, so the one thing I could do by myself was eat. I ate. And I ate. I felt an eating disorder, a binge eating disorder, because I was basically eating all my feelings. And so I gained all this weight. I was sitting around, and my hair was scruffy, my hair was messy, my scar on my chin would throb incessantly, and so there was at one point where I was looking at my mother. And my mother, I had heard her, she was crying. And my whole family they didn't know what to do. What do you do in that situation? So all they could do was band together and just cry. And at that point that my family, because we ended up having to short sell our home.
Yeah. That's another thing. That's
every time I get to this point, it always chokes me up. But we had to short sell our home, our family home, and we're this close to destitute. And my mother's sister, who's well off in the Philippines, had sent one of my other family members to come help me primarily. And she was she's a retired school teacher. And so basically I had a school teacher with me. And so seeing all that and getting those supports, I had realized that, doctors and everything saying like, they don't know where to do that. I'm probably where I'm at and I should just kind of figure it out. And that gave me such a dark hopelessness, and that dark hopelessness, every time I think about it, I get, my knees get weak. But as we come to really talk about there is, I looked in the mirror and I realized that I could just listen and just whatever, and just kind of figure it out from here, and just slowly just let the dust settle and then lie down. Or what would happen if I would have tried. And I do not want to live that regret. And so I know I was fortunate enough, and all of the darkness and everything, but no light was any more refreshing than the first step that I took away from my wheelchair unassisted.
Yes.
Boom. Magic. Right foot magic, left foot magic. And so every day, like everything is magic. And so and literally every day since then has been magic.
Yes. Yes. And you just started taking one foot in front of the other. And then every milestone, you cut your hair, you lost weight, you started exercising.
Yeah.
You got yourself in shape. And then you started to decide that I'm going to go back to school and I'm going to pursue this path of psychology. And I'm going to take a break again. And so this is the foundation of where you started after your brain injury. I want you to take me into your journey into becoming an advocate for people with brain injury, okay? So hang tight. We'll be right back.
Keep the faith.
back with Daniel Ignacio, and I want to pick up your story, Daniel. Before I pick it up, I want to quote, let me see if this sounds familiar to you. I inherited a beautiful brain-injured perspective. And I know that you said that. Yeah. And there are people listening right now that will relate to that, but there's people listening right now that really don't know, what do you mean by I inherited a beautiful brain-injured perspective? Because we're at that point in your story where your perspective changed. Can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So this is really part of my story that brings me so much joy when I think about it, is once I started incorporating, like, eating better, losing weight, getting healthy and things like that, and staying cognitively stimulated, which I later know now are the number one recommendations that clinicians like myself would give to survivors. Mm-hmm. So like those things like physical exercise, nutrition, mm-hmm. sleep, cognitive stimulation, and social connectedness. So the 5 pillars of brain health there. Yeah. And so little did I know that I was doing all of those things before I knew what I was doing. And so mm-hmm. Once I got feeling a little bit better, getting into the swing of things, I started realizing that it's those who are broken who truly know the value of being fixed. Yeah. It's when we have nothing that the little bits are cherished, and that's when I throughout my entire recovery, through the whole darkness and everything, I would pray, I would pray until I had nothing left to say. Right? Mm-hmm. Like when I finally went back to school, I was so scared. But then I knew that, like, I was exercising till my feet would bleed. I would pray until I had nothing left to say. Mm-hmm. And so I always joke and say, like, if I ever get the chance to talk to God, I'll say, do you ever know how long your voicemails were? And so, like, I would pray until I had nothing left to say. And it was in prayer that a saying came to me. It was an adage that, like, we are blessed with hardships to humble us, as it is the meek who shall inherit the earth. Mm-hmm. And I used to just say that kind of rote because it's something that kept coming to me, but I never really fully understood what that meant until this point, where I inherited that brain injury perspective, that beautiful brain injury perspective, that is a lens of appreciation. Yes. And I now, in the support group, as our community, our family, we call it now, we have a term for it, is cognitive privilege. And so privilege, means like without, to be without hardship, that kind of thing in the traditional sense. Mm-hmm. But we're talking about privilege in the brain injury community here, is that because we've experienced these hardships, we've inherited this lens of appreciation to know the value of these things that are just so automatic.
Right. We take it for granted. Yeah. Absolutely. I remember being told, oh my goodness, your son can swallow. That's great. And I was being grateful that he could swallow when he was in a coma. So gratitude along the way at every step is a really important tool to kind of attract the awareness of things you can be grateful for. It's a really good practice, isn't it?
Yeah. And, Michael J. Fox has a quote where it's, optimism is sustainable when you keep coming back to gratitude. And after that comes acceptance.
Absolutely. And wonderful.
And then pairing that with, acceptance, your level of community engagement can never be more than your level of self-acceptance. So once I got to that point, then I was open to accessing student disability services. I got, hooked up with the Department of Rehabilitation, and, I gained some academic success. After
Yes, you did.
yeah, after months and months, my first semester back, full load after the coma, of course, I had my first 4.0.
Yeah.
I
I
didn't
mean,
even have 4.0 even before that.
I know we're not supposed to brag on ourselves, but I do want you to point out some of the achievements academically because you're taking that and using it to give back to people that, haven't achieved necessarily what you've achieved, but you are somebody that can point the way. And so I want you to go ahead and say what your academic achievements are, because I think it instills hope.
Yes. And I think the biggest part is once I got connected with St. Jude Brain Injury Network, I started a support group, and there was like 5 of us at the time, and I was trying to instill hope and gratitude and appreciation because all those things did amazing things for me and still continue to do so. And so I was trying to spread that out, and so the support group grew from 5 to 10 to 15 to 25 and more and more and more. It started growing, and our connections and our network started growing, and a couple hundred people now. And so after that point, I was hearing all of the struggles, all the difficulties, and I could relate on an intimate personal level.
Right.
And I was like, you know what? At one point, I think I remember it was one of the groups is like, hey, why is that? And I didn't have a good answer. And I don't know why, that's like that. I don't know why the medical system, I don't know why the health system, I don't know why. But I'm gonna find out. And that essentially was the driving force behind all of my academic endeavors. I graduated with my bachelor's. I graduated my first master's to become a counselor, right? Because that's what was circulating in things.
You were doing it.
We need therapists. We need and so okay, I'll figure it out and I'll do it and I'll bring it back. And then I did. And they were like, well, we also need blah, blah for some cognitive. We need to understand the cognition. And so it's like, okay, well, if we need to understand how you're performing neurocognitively and how that fits into the context of your life and of your system and of your history and of where your goals and your values, then I need to be a neuropsychologist. And so I was like, all right, how do I do that? I need a doctorate? Cool. How long is that going to take? 5 years? Okay.
Okay.
And then 5 years later, I got my second master's. I got a PhD in clinical psychology. And now, like you said in the very beginning, I am a clinical and neuropsychology postdoctoral fellow at UCLA's brain sport program.
The tongue twister.
yeah. I just got it down myself.
Yeah, it's very impressive. And I have sat in on your support groups and I get your newsletters. But it is you've just taken one step at a time. It started with those magic steps, right, Daniel? You just turned a corner and said, okay, I'm not staying where I am. I'm going to move forward. And really, you write your own story. There'll be obstacles and there'll be struggles. But I do think there's something key about saying, where I go, I want others to follow. I'm willing to try hard and kind of lead the way. And you've been incredibly gifted in what you've been able to do. But I do think a lot of it is because you're such an open heart and willing to give back. So UCLA, what put you in touch with UCLA? That's just where you decided to attend?
Yeah, but and so we'll get there to go back on that.
Okay.
To the previous point, because I think it's so important, is I have the open heart because I am so thankful. I'm so thankful. I'm so grateful. I'm so blessed, and I know it.
Mm-hmm.
I know it. And I'm so glad, and I'm so blessed that, my family, they don't have to worry about, having to transfer me to assisted living facility. I'm so blessed that my younger brother can be proud of me. And I'm so thankful that my parents can be proud of me. And
Yes.
it's not just like, oh yeah, he's alive, he survived, but they can be proud of what I've done, and I'm so thankful. I'm so thankful that it is an honor and a privilege. I would 100 times over dedicate my life to this community. Easy, easy.
Well, I see it in you. I mean, it oozes out of you. And like I say, I bumped into you at various places, and it's so attractive. I want to hang out with you. I really, I want to have more time because I feel better being around your energy, your positivity, and your expertise. So we're going to take another break. When we come back, I do want to talk a little bit more specifically about brain injury and what you know from having lived it and gone to school for all these things, but also how people can plug in to your support group and anything else, your website. I want to be able to make sure people have access to you, Daniel Ignacio. So we'll be right back. We are back. Thank you for sticking with us at TBI Talk. And I am Lindy Boone Michaelis, and I'm talking to Daniel Ignacio. And I want to just kind of give an overview of what you're doing now. We've talked about your brain injury and your journey and your perspective, but what does your life look like right now?
It's so beautifully filled with all things brain injury. And from that, what I mean is from all levels of systems, right? And so working here individually with survivors, and so we're doing from a nonprofit perspective, right? We're working here at St. Jude's Brain Injury Network in Fullerton, and then outward, I'm also the clinical neuropsychology fellow for UCLA's brain sport program. So we're working in like the university medical system. We're doing some very exciting large scale, high powered research. Like right now, my mentor is working with Care for Kids, which is the largest funded study on concussion in adolescents to date by the NIH. And so that larger system change. And then also working in the system of government. So I am the vice chairman for the TBI advisory board for the Department of Rehabilitation in the state of California. And so from public policy to large high-powered research to all the way down to the grassroots, right? We're working with individual survivors, in the trenches. And so I get the honor of having all of those perspectives.
Yes. Oh, that is so fantastic. You have a very organized brain to be able to do all those things. And that's, again, such a spectacular outcome for you. I wanted to just ask you, Daniel, what you're finding, what you see in your world of all these realms. Do people get misdiagnosed and maybe they're dealing with the brain injury, but their clinicians maybe don't realize it, and they just give them a heading of depression or something else, bipolar or something, where maybe it's been an undiagnosed brain injury? Does that ever happen?
Yeah. And so I like, yes. And also in this sense, like, the organization that comes from like that cognitive privilege that we're talking about, right?
Yes.
Being able, those are skills that I needed to develop because in response of my brain injury. And so I've taken them with me from recovery to current. And so it's really been a helpful thing in helping to organize how I approach this public health epidemic. And so, there's a lot baked into this question. So of course, like all good answers, right? It depends. And so, right. And so,
Yeah.
and what I mean by that is like, yes, head trauma can, head trauma can lead to complications, right? And so part of that is, when you have stress, anxiety, depression, right? The brain handles those problems when you have those problems. But what happens when the problem is with the thing that manages problems?
I say yes.
Right. And so, and it becomes a real, like a real delicate answer, especially, if you're coming from a medical perspective, is,
Okay.
yeah, I mean, the head injury can complicate how, you may be processing certain things. And it's also important to consider who comes to concussion or who comes to brain injury, because people typically don't just come, or people don't come to a brain injury as a blank slate. They come with premorbidities, previous sensitivities, pre-existing conditions that could potentially be exacerbated. And so, and like there are the physical ailments, and then of course there's the mental health difficulties. And so with that, the mental health difficulties can be particularly difficult to point and separate. I think it might even be, I would go as far as saying it's impossible to really say like 20% is this, 15% is that, 30% is this, and then the rest is TBI. And so, but there have been some things that have suggested that depression with and without TBI are different physiological entities.
Okay.
They look different under electrophysiological measures. So and so I'm gonna quote so Dr. Siddiqui. I believe they're on the East Coast, but him and his team have termed this sort of separate physiological entity of depression with TBI as TBI affective syndrome.
Okay.
And so it's like, I'm not saying that it's full wide acceptance, but it has been suggested. And so just the mere fact that it has been suggested and it is showing differences in electrophysiological measures, I believe that they used some brain imaging and paired with some EEGs. And so because they look differently, that could suggest that they are separate entities. And they're and I think this has been also replicated in other research groups as well. And so to kind of pair that in, like, yes, there could be some misdiagnoses, or I wouldn't even say maybe just like a lack of clarity in the diagnoses that could happen. But I also don't want to, raise the flag to say that it's found in everybody or with head injury. So I do.
No, that's a very valid answer. I know that we're running out of time, and I want to give you a chance to please share with our audience how they can be a part of your support group, because I know you can Zoom in and participate no matter where you live. Yep, you're in the room right now where people come in person, but there's a whole big screen with a lot of faces when your support group starts. So share how they can join.
Yeah, so perfect. And so like all of the things in the newsletters, right, are I vet them, they're empirically based. So as you just kind of heard, I'll kind of provide what, from a medical perspective, and then of course from a provider's perspective and a clinician perspective. And so I'll try to support all of the things that I say.
How do they get your newsletter though?
Yeah, and so perfect, great question. So if you go to our website, tbioc.org, That's traumatic brain injury, orangecounty.org. And you scroll down to the bottom, there's a big box that says sign up for our newsletter, question mark. And then you
Yes.
put in your name and email address, and you can get all of our updates. I send them out weekly.
Yes.
I can and like there's tons of information. So we give websites and all of that. And so I can sit here and
Yeah.
plug each of those individually, but if you
Just
go
get
to
the newsletter. Yeah.
sign up for the newsletter, everything is there and everything's accessible there.
TBIOC.org. You want to write that down and you want to get the newsletter.
Perfect. Yeah. So sometimes the misdiagnosis or the lack of clarity in a traumatic brain injury or in a history, even a remote history of concussion or TBI, there is a level of understanding that okay, there is some disorganization, right? And we're doing some research at UCLA that's showing that there is some what they call disorganization in the myelin. So basically, the information highways in your brain get disorganized, and so and how that manifests, and we're starting to see that how that manifests cognitively is some possible difficulties in some working memory. And so what that looks like in practice or in behaviors is the survivor, him or her, seems disorganized. Like their speech is disorganized. They're speaking tangentially. Like they're talking, and something that they say reminds them of something else, and so they're hopping conversations, and having difficulties organizing, like where they're at, or planning their days, or sequencing, right? Like putting on makeup and then taking a shower, for example. And so this organization can if it occurs with behaviors and it occurs in thoughts and thinking, then it of course occurs with your emotions, right? Your feelings are disorganized. You have no way. You can't, be like, this is the proper situation. This is appropriate socially, the context. So all of those things can be disorganized, and so and typically how that kind of manifests is as a neuropsychiatric condition. And so to really break the stigma on the neuropsychiatric condition, because I have one, is it's a psychiatric condition like anxiety, depression, that comes in response to a neurologic trauma. And so neuropsychiatric interventions can include some things that are targeted, for your depression, because then like if your thinking is disorganized, then of course your feelings can also be disorganized. And so for some, right, and there was a question earlier regarding some medications, and so I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm going to tread through that carefully, but I have seen that there have been some things used in like an antidepressant may not be helpful, because for a survivor, they may not actually have depression. Like we were saying earlier, depression with and without TBI should be a separate physiological entity from each other. And so like one intervention, and we've seen if an antidepressant kind of doesn't work, because that's not the problem, is sometimes a psychostimulant might be helpful, right? And a psychostimulant or even a non-stimulant alternative like Strattera could be helpful. And of course, again, I'm not a psychiatrist, so please consult your psychiatrist. And so that helps with stimulating attention or arousal, and in doing so, that helps the survivor with organization, like organizing their days, organizing their behaviors, organizing their feelings, and then when you can organize your day and organize the to-do list and things in your life, then by virtue of organizing the things that you need to do, then that brings down some of the emotional distress that stems from frustration or anxiety, or anxiety from being unknown of why I'm having these feelings. And so with increased organization, you can decrease some of those emotional feelings. And, and I am more of a behavioral scientist researcher myself. So I would say that there are strategies, behavioral strategies, like calendars are simple ones, reminders, alerts, social connectedness, helping out with, helping survivor organize. Right, that's what we do at the support group. Is we provide that a platform for survivors to bring in helpful strategies and to teach each other. All right, we provide that platform, that connection for survivors to come in and bring that in. And so again, if you are interested or know of someone who would be helped by those kinds of resources, maybe medication's not something that you're wild about yet. So maybe we want to try some other things first. So please reach out to us at our website at tbioc.org. God bless. And, I also want to leave is, pay attention to how you respond to hardships. They might become a reflection of who you might become.
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you so much for being my guest, Daniel. You were fascinating. Thank you. I hope our listeners took notes, and we'll be back with another episode in the near future of TBI Talk. Thanks for joining us.